Be here in such an amazing company of researchers, artists, practitioners. So I'm very grateful to the organizers for this amazing event. And yes, my presentation is going to focus on Latvian photographer Ivete Stūre. And as was mentioned, by Katarzyna in the introduction, this is actually part of a bigger project, a book that I'm editing together with some colleagues about the history of photography in Latvia in general, because it's a very under-researched field. And within this project, of course, we're dealing with this kind of simultaneous writing and also rewriting of history, dealing with what has been included or excluded of previous histories, and kind of critically assessing the Soviet viewpoint, the patriarchal viewpoint, as well as today's more Western-centric value judgments. So it's kind of this deconstruction and reconstruction at the same time. So the work on Ivete Stūre started as part of this a larger project. And she became the focus of my PhD project as we were able to gain access to her archive. And to situate her work, Ivete Stūre was active between the late 1980s and the early 1990s. So it was about a 10-year period where she was most active in photography. And of course, this coincides with the very politically turbulent transitional period in Latvian and Eastern European history. And she offers a very kind of personal look at this period, which has been characterized by Estonian architecture scholar Ingrid Rūdi as the interregnum. So instead of this kind of transition period, which implies a movement from like one fixed period to another, from communism to capitalism, she argues that we should focus on this specific period of interregnum as a kind of creative burgeoning of its own right, which had all these hybrid, fluid, and uneven processes. And Ivete Stūre's work, I think, is definitely an example of this. And this first work that I'm showing here in this slide, I really love the title, Attic on the Fringes of Europe, because it shows already her very kind of self-aware position and her humorous and even kind of slightly ironic approach, and her view that was kind of correspondent to these shifting power geographical lines of the time of Eastern Europe as this kind of inner other of Europe, and the renegotiating of relationships between center and periphery. So in this presentation, I'm going to share a little bit about Stūre's work and the ongoing process of research into her archive, together with Latvian artist Kristīne Krause-Slucka, and also talking about an exhibition that was curated by myself last year, which focused also on Ivete Stūre's photography. And to begin with, I also want to emphasize the very collaborative nature of research, and this is actually also a kind of transatlantic story, even though I myself am based in Latvia and Ivete Stūre is a Latvian photographer. The starting point for this was actually an exhibition that was available online, and it's still actually available online, so if you haven't seen it, I can recommend definitely checking it out. And this was curated by American art historian Maria Garth at the Zimmerli Museum of Rutgers University, called Communism Through the Lens, Everyday Life Captured by Women Photographers in the Dodge Collection, which of course is this important collection of Soviet-era nonconformist art based in the USA. And this exhibition was actually only presented online due to the COVID restrictions of the time, because this was 2021, so as we remember all too well, museums were quite limited, and this was one of the strategies that they used instead of having it available on their site, presenting it online. And for me, looking at this exhibition, I was really surprised, because I saw Ivete Stūre featured among other photographers from Latvia. And I'd never heard the name before, and I mean, I'm a researcher of photography, so it really shouldn't be that way, looking at her very interesting work. And so this was my first introduction to her name, and it turned out that she had been very active for a short period of time, during which she participated in a number of international exhibitions, and this is how her work also traveled to the USA into this collection. And her works really stood out to me straight away with their experimental techniques, intricate handiwork, this kind of material and intermedial nature, and the exploration of themes related to female identity. So I wanted to know more, and I also wanted to understand why her name had disappeared or completely faded from local narratives of photography history. And this marginalization of female photographers, of course, is unfortunately something that is kind of globally recognizable and also spoken about by other researchers. So I had to go back to the context of her work, and also I'm going to very shortly outline this period in Latvian photography for you to see why Ivete Stūre's work really stands out from the other things going on at the same time. So she was born in 1958 and started working with photography as a young woman in the mid to late 1980s, this period of profound shifts in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states. And the more familiar visual histories of this period often highlight these moments of public upheaval, protests like this iconic Baltic Way, peaceful protest against the Soviet regime, and dismantled monuments, and the grey realities of queuing at the empty stores, etc. But of course there were other equally transformative artistic narratives that were unfolding in parallel, and quieter, more intimate interventions that have received far less attention. Oh, one of my images has been censored. But maybe it's not too bad. So this is a kind of a slide on the broader photographic environment of the late Soviet era, and throughout this period, of course, photography, unsurprisingly to most listeners, was a very male-dominated and patriarchal field. It was marginalized as an art medium, so artistic activity was largely centered around photo clubs. These amateur photo clubs, which functioned as gatekeeping institutions for what was considered serious photography. And within these spaces, models were often relegated, or almost always relegated to the women were relegated to the role of model or muse, frequently appearing as subjects in carefully staged nudes rather than photographers in their own right. And both of these images are by well-known male photographers of the time. And this aligned with the aesthetics of international salon photography. So these were like very stylized, idealized representations of the female body. And with these, the photographers often collected medals and accolades, like reinforcing this kind of narrow understanding of photographic excellence, privileging beauty, technical precision, and male authorship. So the other image you're missing is probably something quite predictable anyway. And of course, I also want to say that there were exceptions to this rule, just a few, but there were, and one of these is Zenta Dzivitzinska, who was active already in the 60s, creating self-portraits and pictures of domestic life, which definitely didn't fit into this salon aesthetic. And her work has later been championed by her daughter, art historian Alice Tiefenthaler, and I think also last year at the Fast Forward conference, a colleague of mine, Liga Goldberger, was talking about her work. And another well-known female photographer in Latvia who was creating these unstaged representations of everyday life and these bohemian and cultural circles is Mara Brašmane. So there were a few exceptions to the rule, and already in the 1980s, when Ivete Stūre also became active, there was a new generation entering photography and creating an important revolution of their own through socially engaged documentary-style work. And these images, black and white and employing the aesthetics of straight photography, sought to depict everyday life with a sense of subjective realism. And crucially, this movement emerged alongside the political and cultural reforms which allowed for greater artistic freedom and made space for subtle criticisms of Soviet social realities. And names like Andrejs Grants, Gvido Kajons, and Inte Ruka, part of this A Grupa collective, became central figures of this new wave, still widely respected today. And one of the most prominent figures of this documentary wave was photographer Inte Ruka, whose long-term photographic projects like My Country People focused on rural communities and everyday people in Latvia in a classic documentary style. And this background of the 1980s kind of goes to show how much Ina Stūre's work stood out, and is also maybe a kind of explanation for why her work has slightly faded from this public memory. And her work really stands out from this well-known, widely exhibited movement of straight photography due to its striking difference in both aesthetic, method, and content. And if it's in its vivid, staged, and often fantastical nature, Stūre's work really went against the grain of this era's dominant paradigm of documentality. In contrast to the straight photography favored by more prominent local peers, Stūre strongly relied on imagination and manipulation. And she herself remarked, I quote, "In my photographs, I can live my dreams. I don't photograph reality because I don't know what reality is. We are surrounded by decorations and illusions." So you can see that she had this very kind of experimental style, also combining photography with various other medium. Despite their highly aestheticized appearance, pictorial influence, and references to symbolism and mythology, Stūre's images also still grapple with significant social themes. And her work is rarely explicitly political, but pieces like Next Frame in Latvia, for example, and others exhibit a keen awareness and commentary of both the enduring legacy of Soviet occupation and Latvia's ongoing reckoning with its past and kind of unclear envisioning of its future at the time. And Stūre's primary residence and creative base was a picturesque yet crumbling old house in the village of Vecmokas in Latvia. And the dusty historical interior and surrounding rural landscape served both as an inspiration and a backdrop for her artistic endeavors. And here you can see, her image, which has been taken in the attic of this rural house, and in the background there are these posters of protests against the Soviet regime, which were current at the time. And here are some more images that could be construed in a political way, as they have these kind of critical elements. For example, on the right side, you can see this head of Stalin, which is actually from a toppled monument in the nearby village. Ina Stūre's husband was working as an architect and happened to be in the square just at the time when this was happening. So this head somehow arrived at their country house and was used in her work later for a few years in different ways, and stayed in their barn. So these political elements of the time do come through. But also, I would say that her work has much more subtle inflections, and these years of the perestroika and the early years of renewed independence, of course, were a kind of mixture of hopefulness and also very practical everyday challenges, including stark material scarcity. Just nothing much was available, and especially talking about photography supplies. So facing a lot of shortages, Stūre, like her other photographers of the time, employed a lot of do-it-yourself methods. So she used what was available at home, including hair dye, including crayons belonging to her daughter, including pretty much any kind of dyes, paints, or emulsions that she could get her hands on. And her work kind of consciously pushed the conventional boundaries of the photographic medium of the time, integrating this analog black and white photography with painting and graphic techniques, unconventional filters, emulsions, multiple exposures, collage, painting, drawing, tinting. So she was really working with the photograph as an object with her hands. And here we can also see the elements that she was using as these props, accessories. This is a traditional woven belt, Latvian woven belt. So for me, this also fits into this kind of new national modernist values of the time, which aligned with the kind of striving towards individuality and creativity, which of course was a direct reaction to this kind of strict aesthetic guidelines of the Soviet era. And besides these themes directly related to processing political experience and experimenting with new values, Stūre's work is also a wonderful example of collaboration and of experimenting with these kind of ideas of female autonomy, female roles, expectations. And I want to say, yeah, that she really subverted this dominant patriarchal model of the kind of master muse dynamic, because for her, photography really was collaboration, and she often involved a close circle of female associates, and notably poet Ivete, who is seen in these images, was a neighbor of Stūre's, and they formed a close friendship as they were both navigating the challenges of raising young children while pursuing their respective creative endeavors. And they often prepared for the photo shoots together, working with antique objects that they had, or creating something with their hands, like elaborate props made from paper, really experimenting and creating these photo shoots as kind of happenings or performances. And these are some of the results of their collaborative work, and this is also Stūre's daughter Gerda seen in the last image. And the resulting compositions unveil the performative aspects of femininity, along with a lot of references to literature and fashion of the time, and a discernible sense of self-awareness and irony. So as Ivete was a poet, they were definitely inspired by literature and also fashion events of the time, like these untamed fashion assemblies in Riga in the 1990s, which really also focused on this DIY fashion aesthetic and performance art. So this is just to show that they had a lot of like cosmopolitan, wide-ranging influences. And adding on another significant layer to the artistic work of Ina Stūre are the vernacular or everyday photos in her archive, which are an important window into the daily life of the time, between socialism and capitalism and all the opportunities and challenges this included, from interiors, fashion, social gatherings, to the domestic life, work, and bringing up children, and shows the important creative relationship Stūre had with her husband, Jānis, who often took portraits of her and reflects her life as a young mother of her daughter, Gerda. This family archive reflects her life balancing motherhood and domestic duties with artistic practice, as well as her rural environment with her distinctly cosmopolitan interests. So this is a challenge for me also in the research, how to combine the interest in these two elements of her work. And I'm going to skip a few slides just to go finally to the presentation of the exhibition that we created together with Kristīne Krause-Slucka. And Kristīne Krause-Slucka shares with Stūre an experimental approach and a focus on the materiality of the image. So this is why I invited her to work with the archive. And here we can see, after we traced her family, we were lucky enough to meet her husband, her daughter, get access to her archive. And together with Kristīne Krause-Slucka, we had an exhibition in the ISSP gallery in Riga, which was part of a wider series of exhibitions in which a series of contemporary artists interacted with archives and with different themes relating to the historiography and performing a kind of critical artistic research into the historiography of Latvia. And in this exhibition, Kristīne Krause-Slucka really chose to focus on this juxtaposition between Ina Stūre's artistic work, these kind of representations of women who are quite abstract and placed in these various performative situations, together with her everyday pictures, which presented her household, her life, her everyday domestic duties. Like at the back, you can see this larger image on the wall, which shows somebody, a cousin of Ines Stūre's, dyeing wool in the kitchen in these big buckets. So it was kind of showing how this daily household work goes hand in hand with this work, also with the images, which was happening almost in the same location, and how this kind of DIY methods were going throughout, and how the whole house became a place of creative expression. And of course, you can see her choice to use these boxes to display the images was also a kind of reference to the archive and the potential of interpreting an archive. And it was showing also quite a few self-portraits of Ines Stūre, and together with these slides, negatives, and a few things like a film wrapped in a shopping list saying that she needs to buy cabbage and nappies for the baby, and so on. So this was our kind of first experiment in working with the archive, and I think that Kristīne Krause-Sludzke's work also served as an example of artistic research's care, in which this materiality really acted as a bridge across generations, being that it was of significance for both artists. And she really approached this with a big responsibility, and we are still working on this archive, and the next step is going to be hopefully to place it in the collection of the National Library of Latvia, so that it can be accessible both to us and to other researchers and curators in the future. So yeah, I would like to say thank you.